As I mentioned, it became officially official yesterday. Drew Brees is retiring, even though that's a moment that everybody knew was coming. That's a really nice moment. The moment that seemed like a lock after the Saints were beaten by the Bucs in the playoffs and the way Drew Brees and his family were lingering on the field after the game. Except weeks passed. What matters now is the absolutely ridiculous career that Drew Brees had. And just because we knew that this had been coming for quite some time, and just because he didn't look quite himself last season, does not mean that we're not witnessing the retirement of one of the greatest to ever pick up a football. We are. And he was. Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP, 13-time Pro Bowler, 2-time AP Offensive Player of the Year, Walter Payton Man of the Year, completed nearly 68% of his passes. Retiring with the most completions in NFL history, the most passing yardage in NFL history. No other quarterback has thrown for more than 5K, more than once in their career. He's done it 5 times. He's had the top 3 seasons for single-season completion percentage in league history. He has 6 of the top 9. Not bad for a guy who was supposedly too small to play in the NFL. Not bad for a guy who was benched for Doug Flutie back in the day. Not bad for a guy who had a shoulder injury that was supposed to have ended his career about 15 years ago. I mean, not bad for anybody at all. And there's so many stories about him, like this one from Albert Breer, about when Brees was still in San Diego. Brees and the Chargers started the 2003 season 1-7. Brees was benched and replaced by Flutie. The following spring, Brian Schottenheimer, who was an assistant with the Chargers at that time, tracked down Brees in the weight room. As Breer writes, quote, "The draft was the next day, and Schottenheimer wanted to give Brees fair warning that the team might take a quarterback. Quote, and he looked at me and said, that would be the worst effing mistake this organization could ever make. End quote. Schottenheimer told me, and I'm like, hey, man, don't shoot the messenger. He goes, quote, worst mistake ever. And he walked off. End quote. You know, that kind of self-confidence was not a one-time thing either. That was an all-time thing. He still had it even after the Chargers drafted Phillip Rivers the day after the Schottenheimer conversation. He had it later that year, as Jim Trotter said on this show a while back.
You know, he'd had that bad year, his second year as a starter in San Diego, and the team made the deal to get Phillip Rivers in the draft. And so I was covering the beat at that time, and I said, okay, now I got to go meet with Drew and see how he feels about this. And I went down to the building the Monday after the draft, and I saw Drew, and he knew exactly what I wanted. He said, meet me in here. We met in a room, and I said, okay, your thoughts on them drafting Phillip? What does it mean? And Drew Brees said to me, this is my team. We're going to the playoffs. And I'm going to the Pro Bowl. Now, mind you, this team hadn't been to the playoffs in 7 or 8 years. Drew was coming off a down year. Phillip was expected to be the guy. Middle of the year, late in the year, when Drew made the Pro Bowl and the team was going to the playoffs, I went to him and I said, hey, you remember that conversation? And he said, yes. And I said, you know, I thought you were delusional, right? And he looked at me and he kind of smiled and he said, I know. But that's how he's wired, Jim. You can tell him, you know, all day that he can't do something. And in his mind, he can, and he's going to. And I think that is a sign of greatness, these guys that we talk about, you know, in that category, that they are wired differently and they are consumed with being great. You know, it's not an alternative.
That's a great, great story. And Jim Trotter is great at telling that story. That's really impressive. Called a shot, backed it up, and did that time and time again. As Jim Trotter said, guys like that are just wired differently. Quote, greatness is not something they want. It's something they need, end quote. But then after that story from Trotter, Brees suffered that shoulder injury. And not just any shoulder injury, but maybe the worst type of shoulder injury a quarterback could ever suffer. He dislocated his shoulder through the bottom of the joint. He suffered a 50% tear of the rotator cuff and a 360-degree tear of his labrum. He was later told that it was a 1 in 500 injury. From the sounds of it, the only way it could have been worse would have been if he shoved his arm into a wood chipper. At that point, nobody wanted him or anything to do with him. Everybody knows that story about Nick Saban in Miami and the fact that the doctors there would not clear him enough to sign a contract. So he ends up in New Orleans, and he makes history. There are other head coach quarterback combinations that have won more rings, but I'm not sure you could find a better match between a head coach and a quarterback than Sean Payton and Drew Brees. You might not find a better match between a city and a quarterback than Drew Brees and New Orleans when he arrived after Katrina. And that marriage right there is like the stuff of legend. They make movies about that type of thing. The quarterback that almost nobody wanted and the city that had been devastated, and it goes on to be one of the greatest stories in league history when they win the Super Bowl only a few years later. So now New Orleans has to think about life after Brees. Who do they go with at quarterback right now? And who's the guy who's got to follow the man? You never want to be the man to follow the man. Well, there was that report that Taysom Hill signed a 4-year, $140 million contract extension. Holy crap. Taysom Hill, $140 million. I mean, that's practically Dak Prescott money for a guy who hasn't exactly put up Dak Prescott numbers. It's got to be his job, right? Yeah, let's not get into that. Because according to Adam Schefter, all the years on that contract are voidable. So it's just a mechanism to free up cap space. In other words, the deal is written in the clouds on vanishing ink. So the expectation is New Orleans will do what they can to re-sign Jameis Winston. And I've been talking to him about a contract already. And if you believe the reports, he actually is the favorite to win that job. So Drew Brees can move into the booth and eat what he wants. Jameis and the Saints are going to hope that they're going to eat and grub on dubs. More on that. I've got thoughts on that matchup. Who should it be? Jameis or Taysom? And not to pile on. Not to pile on the fish. But Dante Culpepper over Brees. Oh, so close. That's going to leave a mark. That's got to sting. Yeah, what do we do here? Except it was not just Miami. I mean, nobody wanted this guy. Except the Saints. Did that big deal, and did that ever return on investment?